much for showing up. We had so many more people than we expected rock up. I really appreciate you coming out, and you know, the love for the Speedway scene obviously runs deep, something that I wasn't aware of before we started this project. But before we rip the blanket off, I just sort of want to run you guys through a bit of the inspiration, a bit of the idea behind the motorcycle, so when you get to check it out, it sort of makes a little bit more sense, because it's a pretty off-the-wall idea. So 3 years ago, or 3 years before we started, it was 5 years ago now, Jake called me and said, I love Speedway bikes, I really want to get this bike that I can ride on the street, but it looks like a Speedway machine. I said, yeah, all right, we'll get a motor and get a gearbox, and you know, maybe a bike that we can have in the shop and measure up and figure out how they're built, and you know, we can take a look at it. And then I didn't hear from him for 3 years, so I just thought that that idea was in the wind, until one day he called me and said, I'm ready. And I said, who is this? He said, it's Jake with the Speedway bike, are you ready to get going? I said, right, come down the shop. And so he told me he had a CAD model of the frame. But that meant a cardboard sketch of the frame, didn't it, Jake? So he brought me down a cardboard sketch and a Speedway bike and the motor and gearbox that you see here today. We're not Speedway guys. This whole sort of thing is very, very new to me. So during the project, you know, I try to draw inspiration from the history of these motorcycles and really dive deep. The love that Jake has for Speedway is palpable. He's all about it. Apart from his wife and kids, of course, it's his everything. He told me to say that, Anna. But yeah, so like I had to really learn about this sort of stuff through Jake, and it's been a really great experience. And then talking to guys like Phil Crump, who helped out with the engine build and some advice when we needed to get it going. These guys live and breathe this stuff. So that sort of really fed our project and made it all the more special to get involved and really learn about this stuff. I won't say I'm educated on the ins and outs of Speedway history, but I really tried my hardest to dive in and get behind what these guys were, you know, building and the style that they like and all that sort of stuff. So I'll pull the blanket off, and then we'll go through a bunch of the details on the project, how it all came about. So yeah, without making you wait any longer, this is Jake's Speedway 500. Okay, so some really obvious sort of like similarities with the Speedway bike. A real hallmark of their motorcycles that differentiates them, you know, vastly from anything else is a 23-inch front wheel. That's a staple on a Speedway bike that you won't find anywhere else. 19-inch rear wheel, and then between those two wheels and the gearbox and engine, everything has been hand built on this motorcycle. We've got a GM500 Speedway engine. This is from the mid-80s, early 90s, before they started to lay the engines over, where the piston operates horizontally now. And one of the sort of early discussion points that we had with Jake was the 4-speed gearbox. These bikes run a clutch and either a single gear or 2-speed for long track, but if you're riding on the street, you need a little bit more than that. So we've mated the GM engine that Phil Crump rebuilt to run on normal pump fuel to a 4-speed Norton gearbox. And this was made brand new out of the box by a mob in New Zealand. So you can buy these vintage gearboxes off the shelf. With those two things in place, we started to plan the frame build. And again, one of the real hallmarks of these Speedway bikes, and it's great that these guys have bought in these vintage Speedway bikes so you can really see what we've sort of been inspired by, is the really steep rake angle. So they run a super steep front end, so when they're laid over on the side at full lock, the rake angle is correct, how you should ride it, which is a weird way to design a motorcycle, but it works for racing, I guess. The front suspension is completely bespoke. That was something that we really deviated from the Speedway. I bought one of these front ends and I put it up against the bike and started to look at it, and it just didn't look strong enough to ride on the street. I wouldn't trust it. So I used it as an excuse to get creative and design and fabricate my own front suspension setup. So I had 8 or so sketches on the drawing board with the frame that was already done. And this is the one that Jake and I landed on, something that I had sort of in the back of my mind for a little while. I wanted to create a Springer style fork. So The only thing that's not really handmade on the front forks is the rockers here that sort of link the suspension to the axle, this part. The style or the way that it operates is very similar to a vintage Harley-Davidson Springer, but I didn't want to see the springs, so I made a set of telescopic forks on my machines at the shop that operate the suspension. So it delivers a very unique touch to this bike, something that was a real stretch of the machining capabilities that I have at the time. And you know, it was an idea, and I just had to sit down and work on this thing for probably 2 solid weeks until it actually was the product that I had in my head and there's something that could operate. So with that sort of in place, we had a skeleton sitting on its feet, or on its wheels, say, and I could start to design and style out the, the sheet metal and the handlebars and all this sort of stuff. So the bikes that we have around us at the moment are probably from the 60s forward, I would guess. We drew a lot of inspiration from more of this style, the really old stuff that resonates with me a lot. This is sort of like the end of vintage Speedway, and then they started to move into the more modern looking bikes. Like that stuff there, yeah, it's a really good example. So we looked at this and then back further. So there was Harley Davidsons from the teens, Douglases that they used to race at like 1900s and stuff like that really informed our style on this project. And then in keeping with that, we wanted to shape everything to be as functional as possible, but without compromising on the style. So obviously the tank is a lot larger, but it's mounted in frame. We had to add bracing to the frame so you have the rigidity to properly ride this thing on the road, so it would go through engineering and be able to be registered. And then with the detailing, this was where we really started to take creative license. So there's a couple of guys in here tonight, Cody and Gio. They work in the shop with me. We started to really throw ideas around, and now that we had a bike where the skeleton looked like a Speedway, we could start to get creative and put our own touch on it and style this thing out. So when you saw it, you would know it come from our garage. We have a signature style and, you know, things that we all like and stuff like that they always filter through onto our projects, no matter what design style we're creating. Things like the detailing in the sheet metal. So the sheet metal is all handmade aluminium, painted over the top with some polished panels. I just recently bought a bead roller, so that was something that I started to play with on this. And if you're a sheet metal guy and you look at this bike, you would probably think this guy just bought himself a bead roller before he built this bike, because I found any excuse that I could to use it. So that sort of stuff, just adding styling and detail. We've got an oiling system. That was a really intricate part of this bike. And Gerard, who's here, I was in his shop complaining about how fucking hard it was to make work. It was a nightmare. Just because these engines aren't supposed to have that oiling system. They run for 5 minutes at a time and then they're turned off on the side of the track to cool down. This thing's got to go a lot further than that. So in order to try and keep this motor cool and running on the street for as long as Jake wants to ride it, we've designed an oiling system that runs off the crank here. So this is an aftermarket pump. We've got an oil filter system, and the oil actually pumps through the frame here, sort of like a pseudo oil cooler, comes up the frame and then into the head. Usually you just have 800 mils of oil here. It blows through the crank, and then it used to just leak out onto the track until the environmentalists got a hold of things, and now they have to have a recirculating system. So we've designed that in, and also added capacity. So if you were racing this bike, it would probably have just under a litre of oil in it. Now this thing runs nearly 2 litres, or a litre and 7 maybe. And that is in order to keep everything as cool as possible while it's hunting down the road. On the cooling system, we've also modified. This was one of the parts that was sort of for style and functionality. So the engine behind me here on that black motorcycle is very similar to the head that was on this one. So we've taken this rocker cover, completely modified it, and added a bunch of cooling fins. This sort of takes the style of the 90s engine that we started with and brings it back a little bit, makes it look more, vintage. That was the sort of spec that we were going at. I think I could probably stand here and talk all night about this motorcycle, but if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to field them now, or if you want to come up and ask me. But just before I, finish the talk here, I just wanted to say thanks to the Gold Coast Moto Museum. Carl and Silvana have been great getting us in here. They don't normally open this hours, and I know that they didn't expect this many people. So, yeah, big shout out to them, and then for everyone who just rocked up. This is incredible for us to do a bit of work like this and have all you guys in here to see it. So yeah, thanks so much. And then of course, the man of the hour, Jake, mate, you've been very patient and very kind. Such a great guy to work with. Yeah.
Give him the microphone.
All right. Well.
Thank you, Tom. I want to thank Tom for the amount of effort and skill that goes into something like this. But the driver for this is to promote Speedway. As Jocelyn says, grassroots motorsport. This is what really drives me. We're losing, but we've also got an opportunity to grow grassroots motorsport, whether it's drag racing, Speedway, it doesn't matter. Get involved if you can and find out what it's all about. These bikes are amazing bikes. They're really in their own category. They're in the hypercar, multi-million-dollar hypercar category of 1:1 power to weight ratio, but these things don't have brakes. These are amazing to watch in real life. So if any opportunity that you do get along, support your local grassroots motorsport.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, we better fire it up, man.
Yeah. Who wants to hear it and smell it?
Yeah.
Woo!
Stop it.
Come on, baby.
Thanks so much. If you guys have any questions, throw them out at me. Otherwise, feel free to come and have a look around the bike.
Hey Jake, you can sit on it so we can get a photo on it.
Sure. Sit on it backwards.
The beer drinker.
To the beer drinker.
To the beer drinker. Good day.
Great job.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Yeah. It's really difficult to keep trying.